Selamat siang. Good afternoon, everyone. I think this is the most difficult to struggle in the afternoon after lunch. And what I'm going to do this afternoon session is to introduce you to our panelists coming from 3 countries. First, I would like everyone to welcome Professor Noel M. Morada. Please welcome. Professor Noel M. Morada is Director for the Regional Diplomacy and Capacity Building at the Asia Pacific Center for the Responsibility to Protect, School of Political Science and International Studies, University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. And he served an Executive Director of the Center and also direct the Center of the Philippines Program. And he is also a member of the editorial board of the Global Responsibility to Protect, which is an international referee journal published by Maurits Nijhoff, Brill academic publisher in the Netherlands. And now Professor Morada is a distinguished professor, Southeast Asian Study Program at the Paul H. Nett School of Advanced International Studies of the Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C. He, again, was a former professor at the Political Science University of the Philippines, Diliman, Quezon City. His area of specialization includes Southeast Asian security, comparative politics of Southeast Asia, ASEAN regionalism, and ASEAN relation with China, Japan, and the US. In Southeast Asia, he continues to focus on political developments and foreign relations of Thailand, Indonesia, and Myanmar, and has been invited to speak on the issues related to the problems of democratization in Southeast Asia. Again, please welcome Professor Morada Noel. So, to save our time, I would like to introduce our next distinguished panelists. Please welcome Tan Sri Dato Sri Muhammad Johar Hassan. Please welcome. He's the chairman, the New Straits Times Press Malaysia, and former chairman and chief executive Institutes of Strategic and International Studies, or ISIS of Malaysia. He is now the non-executive chairman of the New Straits Times Press Malaysia. He was previously also a chairman and chief executive ISIS Malaysia, also a board member of the Security Commission Malaysia, member of the Operation Review Panel, Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, distinguished fellow, Institute of Diplomacy and Foreign Relations, distinguished fellow, Malaysian Institutes of Defense and Security, fellow, Institute of Public Security of Malaysia, Ministry of Home Affairs. He is also Malaysia representative as expert and eminent person to the ASEAN Regional Forum. Again, please welcome Tan Sri Dato Sri Muhammad Johar Hassan. Last but not least, I would like to invite our great host today, Associate Professor Dr. Prapat Thepchatri. Please welcome. He is now the director of Center for ASEAN Studies, Thammasat University. You might be surprised, he was a former consul of Royal Thai Consulate General in Osaka, Japan. Also, he is now Associate Dean for Research and Development, Faculty of Political Science, Thammasat University. Again, please welcome Professor Dr. Prapat Thepchatri. And this afternoon might be very, fruitful for me because this is a new subject that I have learned together with some of you, because the ideas of track 2 diplomacy, it's quite very interesting, because if we talk about, our ambassador, he mentioned about track 1. Today it seems like track 1.5, because we compose of, lots of former Professor Professor Termsak used the not Professor Termsak, our Indonesian professor used the ideas of bureaucratic body of the ASEAN, and we try to unpack this kind of ideas, and we try to look forward after what do we call post 2015 vision. For me, it is very new because my background is history. I don't really get into this, international relations, and I have learned lots of things from these papers. It makes me remind of the stories that I have learned from Singapore. When we are sure that we understand something, but the thing that we understood is not what we understand. Like ASEAN, it's one day, I went to National University of Singapore and US, and I met, it was at the second week of the death or the pass away of the great Lee Kuan Yew, and that girl cried like mad. She crying, and I went to her and I asked her, why you cry? She said, you don't know lah, okay? You don't know lah, our great prominent prime minister just passed away last week. She said, I know, why you cry like this? I got PhD scholarship from Lee Foundation. That's why I have to contribute, crying for him. And then suddenly the professor came and tell the girls, you don't know lah, Lee Foundation has nothing to do with Lee Kuan Yew. Lee Kuan Yew has no business with the Lee Foundation. This is what it reminds me of what we think we know, and we don't really know what it is. That's why we really want to listen to our guest speaker here. And first, I would like to waste your time. Please give a big welcome to Professor Noel, please. Again, I'm the timekeeper. I have you 15 minutes, okay? If I will sign you, okay? Thank you. I will give a sign.
Okay, Sawadee Kap. Pencon, Philippine. So I'm not the one beyond, although I'm beyond in location in ASEAN. And I'd like to thank Professor Prapat and the ASEAN for inviting me for this particular conference, which is very close to my heart. I might have left Southeast Asia physically in terms of my work, but my heart is actually Southeast Asian, basically. Our center, the Asia Pacific Center for Responsibility to Protect, was created in 2008. It was actually launched here in Bangkok, and the University of Queensland is where the center is. And we have 4 country programs in Southeast Asia: Indonesia, Philippines, Cambodia, and Thailand. So the basic work of our center is to promote the norm called Responsibility to Protect, which was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2005. Basically, responsibility to protect is a principle that actually captures all international conventions related to genocide, mass atrocities prevention, the International Court of Justice. So we are promoting the responsibility to protect in the context of Southeast Asia. And actually, last year, we launched the High-Level Advisory Panel's report on mainstreaming responsibility to protect, a pathway to a caring ASEAN community. And no less than former ASEAN Secretary General Surin Pitsuwan was the chair of the High-Level Advisory Panel. So in my presentation today, I think I'd like to just focus on the role of visioning the post-2015 ASEAN in the context of promoting human protection. So I'll just give an overview, and I think before we can talk about post-2015 visioning, we need to look back what has happened, since 1967. I have on the left side of the screen the critical events. And ASEAN was created in the context of the Cold War. And the significance of this period is that you have regionalism in Southeast Asia evolving primarily from the idea of national resilience. ASEAN was founded to actually promote national resilience of the member states. And also regionalism, basically, when you talk about ASEAN, it's an intergovernmental form of cooperation where there is still much emphasis on sovereignty, and cooperation is not in the context of pushing for regionalism at a higher level. And then, of course, in the early days of ASEAN, you have regionalism, which is state-centered and protecting traditional norms, sovereignty, non-interference, respect for integrity of states. And then in the post-Cold War period, you have critical events I've listed on the left side of the screen. And then the significance of this period after 1991 is that regionalism in the context of Southeast Asia and ASEAN in particular is that it is geared towards managing uncertainties because of external security environment. Regionalism still continued to uphold traditional norms, and it is still primarily state-centered. Now, the next phase of evolving Southeast Asian regionalism in the context of ASEAN is the norm-building phase. This is from 1999 to 2007. Now, I think this is a very critical period in the evolution of ASEAN, particularly when you talk about the beginnings of efforts for community building. Regionalism is actually in this period evolving into balancing between state-centered and people-centered values. So when you talk about state-centered, the traditional norms, sovereignty, non-interference, and people-oriented values when you talk about human security, human rights, and human development. And then, of course, during this period, there was a lot of initiatives when you talk about moving ASEAN from a primarily elite-centered decision-making, and there are a lot of calls to have participatory regionalism instead of an exclusively elite-driven decision-making. Now, the next phase, I would call the ASEAN community building phase, starting in 2008. And here you have significant efforts to really push for the community building amidst continuing ASEAN pluralism. And I think early in the first session this morning, there's still the realization that you have a pluralist community in ASEAN because of diversity of political systems. And because of this, I think there are a lot of questions being raised whether in many of the documents that you will see in ASEAN's declaration and all that, there are questions about whether, when you talk about ASEAN norms on human protection, are there shared values or are they simply aspirations? So issues related to this would be regional versus universal human rights norms. In practice, how do ASEAN Human Rights Declaration and Universal Human Rights Declaration will be implemented in member states? And then, of course, regionalism for human protection. There are continuing debates about the ICHR's role and mandate. Some member states think that the mandate of the ICHR is simply to promote human rights protection values and not really implementing the protection aspect of it. I just read in the news that the foreign minister of Indonesia just had this initiative and called for enhancing the mandate of ICHR for protection, and she in fact called for a creation of a human rights division in the ASEAN Secretariat. And this is just, I think, yesterday or the other day. Now, the other reality is that even if you have an ASEAN regional human rights body, only 5 out of 10 member states have national human rights institutions. And they are also diverse in terms of conformity to what you call the Paris Principle or autonomy. And then, of course, regionalism, whether it supports human security and human development agenda. Now, I'm doing a research with regard to ASEAN's important principles, human protection principles. And I'm showing in this slide, when you look at the significant documents that ASEAN has adopted, the ASEAN Charter, the ASEAN Political Security Community Blueprint, the Social Cultural Community Blueprint, the ACW TOR, the ICHAR TOR, and the AIPR, you can clearly see that ASEAN has actually adopted already in many of these documents human protection principles. And just to give you some of the mentions here, so what I did was to examine the documents, how many mentions when you talk about human protection principles and issue areas. So what is very clear in this chart or graph is that human rights protection is very highly mentioned. And then the next one is peace, conflict management, and resolution of conflict. And what is also critical here would be the inclusion of rule-based community, good governance, people-oriented ASEAN, and in light of the diversity of communities in ASEAN societies, there's also a lot of mention on tolerance, respect for diversity, intercommunal understanding, and non-discrimination. So it's very clear from ASEAN's declarations, agreements, and documents that you have already human protection principles included. So when I talk about post-2015 visioning, the question that I raise is how can post-2015 ASEAN be more relevant and meaningful when you talk about peoples in the region? So when you look at human protection principles, do we move from aspirations and declarations to practice? Declarations, blueprints, and agreements are already in place. I already showed you the chart. And of course, mechanisms have already been put in place. But there are clear gaps in practice. So my idea is that ASEAN has to do more in terms of implementation and practice. And part of that would be developing homegrown knowledge systems. I just need to alert you also that in the UN, they already have a framework of analysis for risk factors that could lead to mass atrocities if fundamental risk factors are not addressed for human protection. Now, when I talk about capacity building, prevention and response are very important. You may have declaration, but the institutions in place are not given, support, and the institution is not capable of preventing and also responding to humanitarian crises, for example. So prevention, do we have monitoring and early warning systems in place for mass atrocities prevention? Response, how does ASEAN, and does it have a capacity to respond to intercommunal conflicts and humanitarian crisis situations? Now, the last point here in the slide is what are the challenges post-2015? How do states manage the risk factors when you talk about internal conflicts? Climate change will also have an impact on intercommunal relationships, as well as human security and human development. Now, what are some of the opportunities for human protection as far as ASEAN is concerned? I want to make a distinction between the regional level and the domestic level. I say that at the regional level, there are still, despite the limited space for dialogue with non-state actors and organizations, there are already existing mechanisms that can be used to further engage the state and non-state actors. There are efforts to also push for a review of the ICHAR as well as the ASEAN Charter, and these are opportunities for enhancing the capacity of ASEAN. I also need to point out that ASEAN needs to have closer working relationship with the UN and other dialogue partners. And I think this is one area where ASEAN can continue to improve. Also, I think South-South dialogue and exchange of knowledge and practice, particularly with Africa and Latin America, is very important. And I could really say that there is very limited interaction between ASEAN and Africa, as well as Latin America. And these are actually regions where we can draw lessons from as far as human protection is concerned. And the last thing here also at the regional level is to build regional networks in Southeast Asia, engaging state and non-state actors for human protection. So I think it's important to highlight that there are also other ASEAN non-state actors. One of them, for example, would be the network of ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, a network of NGOs that really call attention of the states if they fail to respond to human protection issues. Now, at the domestic level, and I think this is one important point that was raised in the session this morning, that there's this gap between what we agreed at the regional level and translating that at the domestic sphere. So I think it's very critical at the domestic level when you talk about post-2015 vision for ASEAN to have greater awareness about the importance of human protection, particularly norms that are generated from the factors or forces of globalization and the social media. And because we are talking about track 2, it's important to also stress the role of academic institutions. Educational institutions and academia need to continue to do research, to think outside of the box. Why ASEAN is failing, we have, I think, learned a lot of these factors already, but then again, we need to think outside of the box. And of course, exchange of ideas and lessons learned from the other member states when it comes to managing human protection issues, and also related to good governance and rule of law. In many of the countries in Southeast Asia, you still have to deal with internal conflicts, identity-based conflicts primarily, and we need to address many of these issues. And then, of course, promoting national dialogue when it comes to mass atrocities prevention, with a view to building mechanisms to prevent and respond to the situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. You are very punctual. I think we have learned, including this morning session, that we know what we are going to. We know what is our vision. We already put some of the human protection words in our blueprints and all those kind of documents. But it seems like we don't really know how. And I mean, we know how to, but we don't really get into the points that the implementation of these blueprints should be under whom. It should be track 2, track 1.5 or something like our ambassador mentioned. And that's why we need to hear more from our Professor Jawar, and he will come and give another 10 visions after 2015. Please welcome Dato C. Jawar, please. You have 16 minutes.
16.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Please stop me when it's 14 minutes. Sawadee Krap. I would like to express my gratitude to Thammasat University, in particular Kun Prapat, to see ASEAN, in particular Kun Gandhi, and of course our moderator for this session, Kun Akrapong, and my fellow panelists. I am a good student. Well, I didn't do very well, but good meaning. I'm very disciplined. I follow instructions. So the instruction was to talk on ASEAN's post-2015 vision and to give a track 2 perspective. So I'm speaking on the post-2015 vision, and I'm giving one track 2. Track 2, there are hundreds and thousands of us. Some of us saw you. So I'm giving just one. So I'm talking about vision. What is vision? Vision is something, it's an expression of what an organization, an enterprise, in this case we are talking about ASEAN, would sees itself as coming into being at a certain point in time. Sometimes that certain point in time is declared, like in this case, we had 2020, Vision 2020, now we are going to have Vision 2025. So what we want to be in 2025, and we work towards that. Sometimes there is no date given. It's just our ideal, aspiration. This is the kind of company, organization, or regional grouping we want to be. UN, for instance, the United Nations, no declared vision, but that vision is in the charter, and the charter does not say what year and all that. It says, in fact, we already are. So this is what vision is. And it's good to have a vision, because that vision will determine what you want to do in order to realize that vision, implement that vision. If you have a time frame, say 2025, what you want to achieve by 2025. That is the usefulness of a vision. Now, as far as ASEAN is concerned, our vision in the past, until this year, is embedded in various documents. Sometimes, you have a vision document. Sometimes it's not called a vision document, but it's available in other key documents, founding documents or keystone documents of ASEAN. Of course, we have them in the ASEAN Charter, what ASEAN wants to be, Declaration of ASEAN in 1967. You will find elements of our vision there. ASEAN Charter, elements of our vision, Bali Concord 2, 3, etc. But in terms of declared, articulated vision, ASEAN vision, we have one which we articulated in December 1997. It is called ASEAN Vision 2020. Now, that vision was supposed, it was 1997 to 2020, it was supposed to be a vision which we were going to accomplish by the year 2020. But our good senior, policy formulators, leaders of ASEAN decided that, no, 2020 is too late, we must have it earlier, 2015, primarily because of one reason. This is the economic push. Regionalism was growing everywhere. You had, NAFTA, etc. And the global economic integration exercise was not working very well. So the economies of the world were dissolving into regional setups. And ASEAN thought that, we should very quickly come together as an economic community in order to be able to compete with other economic communities and the large, very, very large economies of the world, like China, which was rising very fast, and the US, etc. That the only way the little economies of ASEAN, individual economies of ASEAN can survive is to work together and become an economic community. Not as unified as in Europe, but working together on many planes and becoming a more integrated economy, including in trade, especially trade, investment, etc. So this moved ASEAN to implement ASEAN Vision 2020 by 2015. So now we have an ASEAN Vision 2020 document which we wanted to implement by 2015 this year. So what we are discussing today is what is our vision following the conclusion of ASEAN Vision 2020 in 2015. Now, of course, we are already now in August, and our officials have been working very hard. They are very far in developing this vision document. This vision document is going to be called ASEAN Vision 2025. In other words, a vision for the next 10 years, 2015 to 2025. And they have not just worked on a vision document, they have also worked on what they call attendant documents, documents which will be attached to the vision, and these documents are on the 3 pillars of ASEAN, which we have heard before. This is the political security community pillar, the economic community pillar, and the socio-economic community pillar. So they have worked out the details, the actual things they want to do, blueprint, work plan, for each of these 3 areas, and this will be attached to the vision. In other words, what we are going to have when they launch that vision in November, they are going to declare it in November this year, is not just a vision document, but also 3 supporting documents articulating what exactly they want to do with regard to the vision in the document, vision document. So it's not just talk, it's actual measures they want to take in all the 3 areas. And as it was mentioned just now, I've had a look at the draft, although I don't mention it here, it's supposed to be, confidential. So, they're going to be more detailed. And for each of the programs or actions, measures to be taken, they indicate who is to implement. And who is to implement not just at the regional level, but also at the national level. So we hope to see a better implementation from now on. I'll come to that later. Better implementation now on, and better delivery and performance. Now, since we don't have much time, in my paper, I look at 3 particular aspects. One, of the vision. One is the vision horizon, how far we are looking. The other one is the vision content. What is the content of our vision for that horizon? And number 3, which we all emphasize, in fact, is performance and delivery. This is very important. It's nice to have beautiful vision and all that, but if you don't implement it, it's not going to be very helpful. So I'm saying, as far as vision is concerned, Malaysia is having this 10-year, it's being pushed. ASEAN is going to have this 10-year vision, 2015 to 2025. I asked the question, does this mean in the future we will continue having 10-year visions? Which means in the year 2025, we'll have another 10-year vision until 2035, this, that. So I am asking myself, between, let's say 100 years, and 100 years is not a long time, you're already 50, almost. So in this next 50 years, and when we also consider we only have one vision so far, you take it all together, in the next 50, 60 years, we would be having 6 visions. I'm asking, aren't we having too many visions? Every 10 years, we want to have a vision. Visions are meant to be long-term. Sometimes they don't change the vision. You don't mess around with your vision. Vision is long-term. Sometimes no time frame. They just said a perfect state. This is what you want to be. Peaceful, stable, prosperous, among the top 10, this, that, but you don't necessarily, in your work plan, you give, by this date, you want to be such and such, but the long-term goal remains constant. And that is helpful because you don't mess around with your vision every 10 years. But we I think, are thinking about 10-year visions. Now, this may not be very good because every 10 years, our officials have to sit and think about draft a new vision. And sometimes, the basic things are all the same. It's peace, security, stability, all that kind of thing. And how are you going to find new words to describe the same thing? And they are going to spend a lot of time, a lot of resources, doing this. So I'm suggesting in my paper, of course nobody will listen, so I can, it's okay to suggest, because track 2, very often the track 1 doesn't listen, They pretend to listen, but, it goes here, go out there, thank you very much, So I'm suggesting either you have a vision from now on, not this vision. This vision is already cast in stone. It's going to be ASEAN Community Vision 2025. That's what it's going to be called. And it's going to have 3 documents. So I'm not touching that at all. But what I'm saying in future, after 2025, you can have two choices. One, no date, just have an ASEAN vision. But you have every 10 years, 5 years, every year, a plan, concrete plan for implementing that vision, where you have timelines, etc., and you are accountable. So it doesn't matter if you have the vision doesn't say what year. It's more important to say this year what you're going to do to implement that vision. In 5 years, what you're going to do to implement that vision. 10 years, how far will you go to realize that vision? So that's one way. So you don't have to waste time drawing up another vision. The second alternative I have, which is perhaps more useful, is to have a longer-term vision. Because visions are normally longer-term, 1 generation, 25 years, etc. So since we have 2025, or going to have 2025, I'm suggesting we have ASEAN Vision 2050. 2050. So the next vision will be 25 years' time. In the meantime, we develop all the new sprints, etc. So that is horizon. This is my proposal regarding horizon. Content. Now, content, they already, how many minutes I have some more? 5 minutes more. Oh, yo. So, sorry. Sorry, lah. So content, I think they have all the content, and I think you can guess a lot of the content too, normal content. Huh? So I'll just run quickly. One is what has been mentioned. Of course, we have not achieved our vision. Vision 2020 has not been achieved. So they want to consolidate further what has not been achieved, and they want to develop some more upon this consolidation process in the next 10 years. Then, of course, people at the center. Third, you must, I'll come to my own ideas later. They will have things about, democracy, human rights, and then you have trans-border security, things like human trafficking, illegal immigration, maritime security, etc. And then they will have in the charter nuclear weapon free zone. That's very important for ASEAN, a zone free of nuclear weapons. ASEAN centrality will be again possibly re-emphasized. And then ASEAN to play a more active role in international affairs. So become more dynamic and proactive. This will mean ASEAN will have to have a more common security, foreign policy. Economic field, of course, to become more integrated and develop further, etc. And socio-cultural area to emphasize things like human development, etc. What I think we should also have, which they can listen to, or you can listen to, or you don't have to, agree. I think one of the things we have to, because we will look at challenges. What are our challenges in the next 10 years when we develop that vision? And what are the most important, pressing, compelling challenges we confront? Now, different countries have different things. So if you talk to Laos and to Singapore, two different worlds. But we have to accommodate all that. But I think some of the important things, some, not all, will be all of us are going for national security and national unity. Whether it's Myanmar with its different ethnic groups, etc., Rohingyas and this and that, or Thailand, which you have your problems in the south, you have 100 years of problems. And it's not just a normal problem. It's a violence for 100 years and still not resolved. Philippines? Sometimes we forget all these things, CPP, NPA. And in Malaysia, we have ethnic, religious. We are weak because of that. I suppose Singapore to some extent too, and Vietnam with its... So I think our primary problem is this, and never forget that. Which is why in our vision document, etc., this thing about tolerance, accommodation, inclusiveness, etc., will be an important element. The other thing I think which we should stress, and which is going to be stressed, is political development, better governance for all of us. It will be there, but we must bear in mind that states are not going to be driven by ASEAN documents. Sometimes they just agree because, it's the good thing to do, and if you don't agree, you look like a bad guy. Who wants to quarrel with democracy? Who wants to quarrel with human rights? But the actual implementation is going to be driven by internal dynamics. Number 3, I think, transnational crime, etc., is going to be there. But one thing which I think I want to emphasize, I don't know whether it's going to be there, let me put it that way, is communication security. Internet, telephone conversations. Now, you all heard before how we are all vulnerable. There is some big power out there which listens in to everything. And they have a friend in our region too to help them do this. Now, I think this is very dangerous. And it is not good. It is not a good thing to do after a certain point. If it's your own security, national security, if that country may threaten your national security, to that extent, you want to listen in. If you have the capability, fine. But if you want to listen into the conversation between a husband and a wife, I'm talking about presidents and the president's wife, prime minister and I think that's a little bit too much. And I think we must take a very strong stand on this, and I don't know whether ASEAN will do it. I don't think it will. Because they don't even think about this, because we are all very Western. Our narrative, our articulation, everything very Western. I'll come to that later if I have time, if not during Q&A. The other one is, the other major problem we are confronting in this region now is the resuscitation, the resurgence of major power rivalry. The rise of China, and US and Japan, all these major is coming back again. So when it's coming back, one of the things which you want to think about, we don't want to get involved in their problems or become their proxy. In other words, we are talking about ZOPFAN, Zone of Peace, Freedom and Neutrality. Now, some of us we become very cynical about ZOPFAN. Actually, it's very relevant. ZOPFAN doesn't mean you don't engage. ZOPFAN just means you don't take sides when two big powers are fighting. That's all it says. And I think that's very wise. And yet, ZOPFAN, I hope it's there in the vision. I'm not sure, but I don't think it'll be there. Or I'm not sure, because we are all, as I said, West, Next, I think I know we are don't have much time. I won't touch on the rest. I've already mentioned some of that. So, performance. I would like to emphasize on performance. ASEAN has always been weak on performance. Now, everyone is weak on performance. United Nations is very weak on performance. You look at the Charter and what the United Nations is doing is supposed to prevent war. You see war everywhere. So you don't have to worry too much about not performing. I'm sorry to say this kind of negative thing. It's not good for students, especially. We are supposed to be very, So, but at the same time, there must be some credibility. And look, EU too, they don't have they have they talk about common European security, foreign policy. They don't have a common European security, foreign policy. So we all have our this. So we must take it that visions are sometimes ideals. In practice, they are this. But at the same time, there must be some credibility. We must have some credible things in our thing. But here is where we come to this problem about how much sovereignty, sovereign authority we want to give to an authority above us. And here, we have talked about this, probably we'll talk some more. We are not really prepared yet. I don't have much time. I don't want to go into it yet. I think there are good reasons why we don't go into it. I don't think we should spend too much time on that. I think the important thing for us to realize is this. Don't expect too much from ASEAN. Again, this is a bad thing to say. I'm sorry, my friend. You must expect more from your own country, from your own people, from your own government, from your own non-state actors to work within your country. That is where the action is. That is where your future lies. That is where your welfare will be met. At home, in your own country. Sometimes we expect too much of this thing, at the same time we don't, So the second important thing for us is to work as neighbors. Work closely together as neighbors, because most of our problems are neighboring problems. Whether it's human trafficking or this or that, transnational crime. So build up bilateral mechanisms. These are more important than the ASEAN mechanism. And as far as ASEAN is concerned, I think we should focus on just 3 or 4 things. First, economic community. That's the most important thing. And that is where we are going to make the most progress, by the way. Because that is where people's needs, your welfare, your food, your home, better life, etc., will be essentially economic, depending on the country. Second is political security. Political security internally is going to be a bit difficult because sovereignty and this and that. But we are all small, weak countries. Unless we come together and act as a grouping in the world, in the international arena, our voice will be little heard, our voice will be little heeded. That is in fact why ASEAN came together at first, to bring peace among ourselves and to give ourselves a stronger voice. So that is second. And finally, I think, humanitarian disasters. ASEAN will work very well when its humanitarian disaster affects any of us. Because then there is no, whether, intervention, non-intervention, except sometimes there's some countries. But normally, because it's human, it's flooding, it's a typhoon, it's an earthquake, etc., there will be an outpouring of grief, sympathy, etc., and we can assist. I think these are 3-4 areas we should focus upon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. I have to say thank you for your great speech. And you know what I get from Dato's speech is something like vision should be something that we expect, but we need no deadline, right? It reminds me of two options, yeah? It reminds me of myself when I get married. Sorry, girls, I'm going to get married. When I get married, my vision is to have baby within this year. And then after that, I have to raise a baby. It might be, compared with this, ASEAN. In 1976, we got married. We got married together. 2009, we get pregnant. And 2015, we were going to deliver a baby. And then 2015 is not the end of ASEAN, but it's like Professor Gandhi said, the beginning of the good end, that we have to raise our baby. That's why the good things and the best policy that we need is to implement. that is the need. Dr. Termsak might, voice back to the track one, secretariat headquarters in Jakarta. And last but not least, I'd like to present Professor Dr. Prapat Tepchatri to, conclude everything. Please welcome Dr. Prapat Tepchatri. Krap.
So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I find it difficult to speak after Joha. Could be very tough. Anyway, my presentation will talk about ASEAN, that ASEAN post 2015 vision, track to perspective. My presentation will touch a little bit on ASEAN past, present, and future. I don't have much time, 50 minutes, so I'm going to be brief. Okay, let's start with the ASEAN before 2015. We start with the Bangkok Declaration in 1967, and then we have Bali Summit in 1976. After that, we have Singapore Summit, and then we have ASEAN Free Trade Area. Bangkok Summit in 1995, with the expansion of ASEAN members from 5 to 10. And then in 1997, we have economic crisis. So after the crisis, ASEAN agreed that maybe we should move forward. And then there came the idea of the creation of the ASEAN community. And we agree on that in the year 2003 with the Bali Summit. And then during the past 10 years, ASEAN was busy trying to create to set up the ASEAN community. So, ASEAN on 2015, as you know, on December 31st this year, we're going to have the ASEAN community, which will consist of 3 sub-communities: the AEC, the APSC, and the ASCC. 3 sub-communities, 3 pillars. This is going to be with us by the end of this year. But the main topic for this conference is to look into the future. What should be the future of ASEAN beyond 2015? And as Joha has mentioned, right now ASEAN government is trying to come up with a vision, and they set the target for 10 years, going to be ASEAN Community 2025 vision. So I'm going to try to add something into this vision. I think first of all, I think that we should look into challenges before we can set our vision. As Joha already touched upon this, we have a lot of challenges. And I divided it into 2 dimensions. First, internal challenges, the intra-ASEAN problems. I find out that there are a lot. At least we have 10 challenges for ASEAN. Number 1 is that democracy and human rights. Even though we have AICHA, we have ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, but it's still very weak, ineffective, and we need a lot to improve ASEAN human rights mechanism. Okay, this is number 1 challenge. Number 2 is the political and security challenge. We still have political conflicts. We still have border disputes. We still do not trust each other. This is a big problem for ASEAN. Distrust. And distrust is the very important obstacle for ASEAN to move forward. And because of this distrust, that's why we cannot move very fast into the future. We have a lot of problem on political cooperation. We also have a lot of problem on economic cooperation because we see each other not as partners but as competitors. Okay, distrust is a big issue. And why we do not trust each other, I'm gonna say that because we are lacking common identity. We have no ASEAN identity. Okay, so this is the challenge number 2. Number 3 is the economic challenge. The rich-poor gap among ASEAN countries. As you know, this is a very big constraint for ASEAN economic integration. The gap between the rich and the poor, between, let's say, Singapore and Myanmar, for example. Okay, so the gap is a very big problem. And as I already mentioned, we see each other not as partners, but as competitors. So this is the big issue for economic integration. And On top of this, we also have like a deeper integration problem. Right now, we are FTA. ASEAN is an FTA. We are thinking that maybe by the end of this year, we're going to move toward the common market. But it is not. We don't have 4 freedoms yet. So AEC is not a common market. It's not a single market yet. So this is a deeper integration problem. And also, we also have problem number 4 is the wider integration problem. We could not expand. Right now, we have 10 member countries. We could not expand. Maybe we can add more, like Timor-Leste as a new member. But then after that, then what's next? What's going to be next in terms of our wider integration? Okay, this is problem number 4. Number 5, as I already mentioned, we are lacking common identity. And number 6 is a structural problem. ASEAN is still an elite organization. ASEAN is known among government officials, elites, bureaucrats, diplomats, big businessmen. But ASEAN is not a people-centered organization yet. Okay, this is problem number 6. Number 7, the charter, ASEAN charter is still very weak. It's a weak charter. We have to amend charter. And then problem number 8 is the domestic politics. You see around, you can see domestic political problem popping up here and there. In Myanmar, in Thailand, in Malaysia, in the Philippines. So domestic politics also provide a big challenge for ASEAN, as Johan already touched upon that. And then problem number 9 is the foreign policy of the member country. This is also a big internal challenge, because some ASEAN member countries do not place ASEAN as a top priority in terms of its foreign policy objective. In other words, ASEAN is not very important for some countries. So this is also a big problem for ASEAN in the future. And lastly, we don't have common policy. We don't have common position. As Ambassador Asada mentioned, this morning, that we find it very difficult for ASEAN to come up with a common position on international issues. We are too divided. We are not unified. That's why we don't have common position. Okay, these are 10 internal challenges. Right now, I want to move to the external challenges. At least there are 5 external challenges for ASEAN. Number 1 is the unipolar world. The world dominated by one superpower. The US in particular still would like to be the core of the regional architecture, would like to be number 1, still would like to maintain its number 1 status in Asia. That is why when we talk about ASEAN centrality, when we talk about ASEAN would like to play a central role in the regional architecture, that would be easily said than done. Because ASEAN will find, beyond ASEAN, several big powers. The US, and then we have the rise of China. We have the rise of China, we have the rise of India, and the rest. Okay, this is going to be number 2 external challenge, the rise of big powers, particularly China. And then we also have competing multilateral forums, competing with ASEAN. You look around, you can find APEC, which is still alive and well. And then you can see TPP is on the horizon. Trans-Pacific Partnership. If the negotiation would be concluded, it will be the largest FTA in the world. And it will compete with the ASEAN FTA, particularly the RCEP. So this is a big challenge for ASEAN. When we talk about ASEAN, we would like to play a central role in the regional economic architecture. I don't think that's going to be easy because some other countries, particularly the big powers, would like to be the core of the regional economic architecture. Let's say TPP. Then we also have like several Chinese initiatives, like AIIB, like SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And then we have like BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa grouped together as a new grouping. So these are the competing kind of a multilateral forums with ASEAN. And of course, as Johan mentioned, and we also face a very big external challenge in the sense that we see that in the future they become more and more big power conflicts, particularly between the US and China, Japan, China, India, China, for example. And then we have the regional conflict like in the South China Sea. So these are some of the external challenges for ASEAN. Okay. So my last part going to be, and then what should be the future of ASEAN? Taking into account these challenges, internal and external. I think that the track 1, as Johan mentioned, the ASEAN Summit, the ASEAN Foreign Ministers already come up with a vision, ASEAN Community Vision 2025. And I think that the central element is going to be something like consolidate ASEAN community, promote ASEAN as a people-centered organization, enhance ASEAN centrality, and build ASEAN's common platform on global issues. I would agree that these should be ASEAN vision in the future, main elements of the vision in the future. But I would like to add something in it, my last part of my presentation. I think that we should look carefully on the ASEAN Charter. And I think that we should amend ASEAN Charter, we should improve, we should add a lot of things on the ASEAN Charter. Something like creating the mechanism for the civil society or for the people. I would call it consultative council. And maybe we should think about the creation of the ASEAN Parliament, the ASEAN Court of Justice. We don't have any judicial or legislative mechanism in ASEAN. The only thing we have is only executive branch. So maybe we should think about that. Okay, and of course, we must strengthen ASEAN Secretariat. We should come up with a common policy. Unity is the key for ASEAN in the future. We are too divided. We must have unity. And we should have core leadership. And as Dr. Tamsak mentioned this morning, we need to think seriously about how to mobilize resources for ASEAN. Okay, for the APSC 2025, I think that we should strengthen human rights mechanism. I don't have time left, so I'm gonna skip this part. Human rights mechanism, trust building will be the key for our future. Resolve political conflicts and border disputes. And then we should have mechanism to deal with transnational issues. We should think about creating the ASEAN peacekeeping force. This is going to be APSC 2025. The AEC 2025, my idea is that maybe we should move toward creating a comprehensive common market with real four freedoms: free trade in goods, services, capital, and labor. And moving beyond that, maybe we should think about economic union. And also the gap, narrow the gap, bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, and creating the mindset of ASEAN people from seeing each other as competitor to be partner. This is going to be for the AEC 2025. For the ASCC 2025, I have two very important things to propose, to emphasize, is that we should build ASEAN identity. This should be the key element in the ASCC 2025. ASEAN identity is very important. And then the people and civil society's participation in ASEAN. This is another important thing for the ASCC 2025. Lastly, how about ASEAN's future concerning about ASEAN +1 and +3? I think that future circumstances will demand that ASEAN must pay a lot of attention to this. How we can balance our relationship between, let's say, ASEAN-US and ASEAN-China. How can we play a balancing game? How can we engage all big powers? And how about the ASEAN +3, which is going nowhere? How about our vision 10 years ago that we would evolve ASEAN +3 into the East Asia community? Okay, I think this is going to be a very important issue. And then lastly, about ASEAN +8, the EAS, the East Asia Summit, the RCEP, ASEAN +6 FTA. These also are several things that we should think and should put into this kind of a concentric circle that would put ASEAN as the core of the regional architecture. This should be a very important element in the ASEAN vision in the future. That is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you so much, Professor. And I think it's time for the floor to respond or ask the question if you have. Unless I will throw the hot potato for the next session. Still, we have about 5-10 minutes, please. Yes, please. Please address yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is James Gomez. I'm a Singaporean academic based in Bangkok University. So I've heard a lot of the things said about Singapore, but in the ASEAN spirit, let it go. This is a question to all the colleagues in the panel. I think the vision for ASEAN may fundamentally lie on a question of values. Does ASEAN have the kind of values that binds it together. In particular, from the first speaker's perspective, protection, the formulation of vision from the second speaker, and finally, the kind of architecture that's being spelled out. And in all this consideration, the elephant in the room, so to speak, China, the values that it will bring to the region, I think that's missing in the discussion. So I'm throwing this for our colleagues' consideration and response. Can we think meaningfully about protection, which is already weak, when we have that competing set of values from China, where we don't talk about the promotion of democracy, but rather the diffusion of authoritarianism. In formulating the vision for our region, how much of the values, shared values, are present, and are there external power consideration that shapes the formulation of region? And finally, to our third speaker, the construction of an architecture. Can we realistically think about an ASEAN-based architecture when really, perhaps a larger Asian architecture? Of course, it's alluded to into the, +1+3 and, East Asia Summit. So just throwing this back to the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would you like to respond? Yeah, please, we would like to have another question and then we will respond later. Please, Dr. Termsak krab.
I have a question for Dr. Arnold. Noel, sorry, Noel. I was surprised to hear from you that R2P is still very much active concept. Using this R2P concept, what can ASEAN member states do to handle or better handle Rohingya problem?
Very updated problem. So two questions. One is, can ASEAN have their own architecture base? And then Rohingya, please.
Okay, I'll respond to the first question about shared values. For me, it's still an aspiration. Many of the things that you see in the document of ASEAN are articulations of aspirations within, the 10 member states. And this is why I think it's very critical now that we need to understand that there's still a debate about what kind of regionalism are we pursuing? Is it still going to be elite-centered, or do we open, in terms of inputs, the participation of non-state actors? And I think there's a continuing tension in that regard. But one thing I can say is that at least after the adoption of the Bali Concord II, the mechanism, and I think it's Malaysia that started this, the Civil Society Conference, that was in 2005. And because of that, mechanisms have been put in place to actually consult non-state actors and civil society groups. Of course, a lot of people criticize that it is not adequate, but the mechanism is there. And I go back to the argument that you really go back to the domestic level. If the environment at the domestic level is not that open, then it really does not redound to the people at the domestic level. You can have grand vision, but then when it comes to implementing those vision, you go back at the domestic level. Now, shared value for me is still an ongoing process. We're not just talking about regional values. Don't forget, there's also international humanitarian law. There's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There's still ongoing debate within ASEAN on how do you balance the ASEAN Declaration on Human Rights versus the UN Declaration on Human Rights. So, and again, the domestic dynamics, the politics at the domestic level will actually determine many of these things. And on the question about alternative perspective, I don't see China as a monolithic society. There are, in fact, a lot of people now speaking up, no matter how, the central government tries to, control. You cannot anymore control, I think, things when you talk about social media, the influence of globalization, and a lot of Chinese people are now traveling all over the world, and they begin to understand that there are alternative options when you talk about politics, economics, social, and cultural issues. So for me, when you talk about ASEAN developing shared values, it's not only going to depend on elites, but more importantly, the non-state actors and particularly academic institutions. How you actually promote shared values, you start with education, respect for human rights, and at the same time, recognizing that there is diversity of perspectives. It's quite difficult in many of the countries in Southeast Asia that are, diverse from a cultural perspective, religious perspective. On the question of R2P, how ASEAN can actually implement this principle in the context of, not just the Rohingya, but all other issues related to protection of minority groups. In Indonesia, for example, they're still struggling with the question of atrocities in the past, and also protection of religious minorities in Indonesia. And so the kind of norm promotion that we're doing in the center is to actually emphasize that we need to build awareness about the risk factors related to the commission of 4 crimes related to R2P. The 4 crimes are genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. I think it's very important for me to say that there are a lot of opportunities that ASEAN can actually do in terms of addressing many of the issues related to not just the Rohingya, but also protection of minorities in the region. And one of them is really to start with addressing the root causes of conflicts in the region. And prevention is an important pillar of R2P. Don't think of R2P as simply about the 3rd pillar, which is intervention. Most of the time, intervention comes in because the state has failed to take full responsibility in preventing many of the atrocities. I remember in one of our seminars in Indonesia, and this is very clearly articulated by one of our speakers, a person from the military. He said, there's no conflict between R2P and local values, at least as far as Indonesia is concerned, because he said, if states take their Pillar 1, prevention responsibility, seriously, and they have asked international assistance to provide capacity building, then they can address many of the root causes of conflicts in their own society. So you don't need to fear Pillar 3, because Pillar 3 will come in only when states fail to take their primary responsibility to protect.
Thank you. Professor Jawa? Jawa.
Yes, thank you very much, James. Nice to see you here. This, for me, I think China will it's not, for me, it's not China that will be the factor. It's ourselves. It's us, ourselves, in our own societies, communities, our own countries and states. And I feel that all of us have these values, universal. These values are universal. And they are shared by all of us. And you will see these values expressed in the ASEAN Charter also. Besides the fact also that if you take the governments, all of them subscribe, not to all, but quite a few of these international instruments on human rights, etc. So I think values in terms of expressions, or as Noel said, aspirations, I think all of us have that. The problem is practical, to practice those values, to implement those values. And this is where we come short. Some of us, the deficit is greater than in other countries. Sometimes, I mean, we don't have to go into this, it's due to historical development, external factors, internal factors, our domestic makeup. We are made up very differently. Different countries have different challenges, some of them a bit more complex or whatever. So I think our main problem is internal. within our own countries and our own societies, and we will have to work on that. I'm sorry, it's rather a weaker response, but I always say we have to look inside us. Our greatest challenges, our biggest enemies are ourselves. Thank you.
Okay, I would go along with my colleagues. You know, when we talk about values, I don't think that there is any problem concerning about our shared values in ASEAN. As Johan mentioned, you know, there are, many of them are universal. And of course, it's the Western, you know, originally it's the Western ideas, Western values. Almost all of us are Westernized. So I don't think that we have any conflicting in terms of the values. And if you talk about Chinese values, I don't think that the Chinese value could be able to compete with the Western values that dominate the world right now. You know, like we have shared values. We agree that we should have a community. We agree that we should have political cooperation. We agree that human rights is a good thing. We agree that liberalization is a good thing. You know, we agree that social welfare is a good thing. So I don't think that there is any problem on that. Okay, that is the first question. Then the second question you asked about the regional architecture. I also think that there is no problem. You know, if you think that ASEAN community is a regional architecture, so ASEAN community in that sense is a regional architecture, and ASEAN could be able to play a central role to maintain its centrality. But if you go beyond ASEAN, you're talking about East Asian regional architecture, or when you talk about Asia-Pacific architecture, and then you will face a problem, and then ASEAN will face a problem because we have the US, we have China, we have Japan, we have Australia, we have India. In that sense, I think that it would be, as I already mentioned in my presentation, that would be difficult for ASEAN to play a central role in the wider regional architecture. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I could not come to the conclusion because we still have the next session to do so. And I think as we have the three pillars, we have good eating as AEC, good living as APSC, and happy life as ASCC. We no need to say rest in peace because still we need peace. And yes, still you and track 2 or track 1, we have to work hard. And yes, I will hardly work. Thank you so much.